This is real footage, not a movie, not a simulation. A drone hovers into place, unaware it's about to capture a moment of unbelievable tragedy. A man stands 130 feet above the ground. Matvey Kucherov, 29 years old, blowtorch in hand, cutting through a steel anchor holding up the roof of the St. Petersburg SKK Arena. Sparks fly. The steel groans and then collapse. The cables snap like rubber bands. The roof doesn't fall, it implodes. Thousands of tons of steel and concrete fold inward. Matvey runs. He sprints across the crumbling beams, reaching for the suspended man cage, his last hope. But the beam shifts beneath him. The man cage swings away. And then he's gone, swallowed by the collapse. And in seconds, a structure that stood for 40 years is reduced to dust. But was this an accident, or was something more sinister at play? This is the story behind the SKK Arena collapse. It's 1977. The St. Petersburg Sports Arena, known as the SKK, was being built for the 1980 Summer Olympics, a global event that the Soviet Union wanted to use as a showcase. This was about power, prestige, and proving Soviet engineering could outmatch the West. The Soviets were in a race, not just for gold medals, but for architectural dominance. They wanted big, bold, record-breaking structures. And the SKK, it was exactly that. This was no ordinary stadium. Most arenas have traditional domed roofs, supported by pillars, beams, or trusses, a standard approach that distributes weight efficiently. But SKK didn't follow the rules. Instead of a conventional support system, the entire structure relied on one key feature, a massive circular ring beam that sat at the top of the outer walls. Now, here's where it gets interesting. This ring beam wasn't just for decoration. It was the only thing holding up the entire roof. No internal pillars, no middle supports. Instead, the roof hung down from this ring using a network of steel cables. Think of it like a giant suspension bridge turned upside down. Except instead of holding up a road, it was holding up thousands of tons of steel and concrete. The steel cables stretched from the inner roof to the reinforced ring beam. These cables distributed the weight evenly, allowing the entire stadium to remain open and spacious inside. There were no obstructed views, no bulky columns, just a vast open arena, an architectural marvel at the time. In fact, it was so unique that in 1988, the French Scientific and Technical Society listed it as one of the 20 greatest engineering feats of the 20th century. But here's the problem. This design came with serious risks. Russia gets harsh winters, heavy snow, freezing temperatures. A traditional stadium roof would be angled or domed so that snow slides off naturally. But the SKK had a concave, bowl-like shape. Instead of shedding snow, it collected it, turning the roof into a giant basin for tons of ice and slush every winter. Now imagine this weight pressing down year after year. Over time, the stress on the cables increased, and let's just say, things weren't exactly being checked or replaced regularly. By the 2010s, engineers started to notice serious structural problems. The steel was corroding, the cables were weakening, the ring beam had developed cracks. The arena, once an engineering marvel, was now a ticking time bomb. For decades, the SKK Arena hosted global events, but time caught up. And by the 2000s, it was aging, overshadowed by newer venues. Reinvented as a concert hall, it welcomed legends like Metallica, Madonna, and Lady Gaga. Yet by 2019, the final curtain was falling. On August 12th, just a day after Jennifer Lopez's sold-out show, the local council made the call: demolish the SKK and build a modern replacement. They claimed the SKK Arena was beyond repair, but many residents didn't buy it. The sudden closure, just a day after a sold-out concert, raised suspicion. Their decision felt off. And the winning bid to carry out the demolition? A shadow company, one registered employee, no history, no experience. And yet, They were handed the contract. And in just over a month, in October 2019, demolition work began. Fast. Too fast. Just a hurried dismantling that reeked of backroom deals and quiet handshakes. Local efforts to preserve the building were already underway. People formed human chains around the stadium in protest. Local architects applied for recognition of the SKK building as a cultural heritage site, but their voices were ignored. A building like this needed careful deconstruction. I'm no expert, but it seems logical to start by removing the roof panels first, then gradually detach the cables, and finally, disassemble the ring beam, taking it apart piece by piece to minimize the risk of collapse. But in January 2020, instead of working from the top down, demolition teams were cutting straight through the cables and anchors, the very things holding the roof in place. No temporary supports, no reinforcement, no backup plan. They weren't even cutting in a balanced sequence, not every other anchor, no care for structural balance. Instead, they were slicing through one side at a time, stacking the weight unevenly until the entire roof leaned in for the inevitable. It's 11:15 a.m. on the 31st of January, 2020. 4 workers were positioned high above, tasked with cutting away the anchors. 2 massive cranes, each carrying a suspended basket, lifted 2 men onto the circular beams. 1 worker stayed inside the basket, likely monitoring the gas and welding equipment, while the other stepped out onto the beam, leaning over the edge with a cutting torch to slice through each anchor. Matvey Kucherov was among the men tasked with the final cuts. But there was a problem. He wasn't secured. No rope, no carabiner. He should have been tethered to the safety cage, anchored against the inevitable. But he wasn't. An oversight that would soon prove fatal. Matvey was standing on the upper ring beam, about 40 meters above the ground. If you slow down the footage, you can see exactly what happens. He is crouched on a steel beam, gripping a blowtorch. His job is to sever one of the last remaining steel anchors connecting the roof to the ring beam. Now, let's break this down. If you look at the footage, you'll notice something critical. All the other anchors behind him have already been cut. That means the weight of the entire roof is now being transferred onto fewer and fewer remaining supports. The structure is under enormous stress. Matvey works carefully. His torch melts through the thick steel, sparks flying as the metal softens and weakens. Within seconds, the anchor snaps apart. And that's it. That's the final trigger. The moment the last anchor is cut, the entire system loses balance. The ring beam, already under extreme pressure, cracks. And once that happens, the cables rip free one by one. The weight shifts violently. The roof collapses inward, dragging the walls down with it. Matvey immediately realizes what's happening. He tries to escape, running toward the man cage suspended by a crane. His only chance, and he almost makes it. But as the structure crumbles, the cage swings away with the other worker inside the cage miraculously safe. The beam beneath Matvey shifts and then disappears, and in the blink of an eye, he's gone, buried in the rubble below. Rescue workers later recovered Matvey's body, buried beneath the wreckage. The 3 other workers had survived, shaken, but alive. The SKK Arena was destroyed, reduced to a pile of steel and concrete. But was that always the plan? Locals believed so. They suspected the collapse wasn't just an accident, but a convenience. Once the roof fell, there could be no restoration, no preservation, only profit. And within months, the site was cleared. But the tragedy didn't end with the collapse. The companies responsible became ghosts. SK Pride, the main contractor, wasn't even a real construction firm. It had just 1 registered employee and no history of major projects. The subcontractor, AN Dostrojstrands, had existed for only 3 months. It had never handled a demolition, yet somehow it secured the contract to dismantle one of Russia's largest arenas. When the collapse happened, both companies denied responsibility. Russia's investigative committee launched a probe, but nothing came of it. No criminal charges, no consequences. Authorities claimed there wasn't enough evidence to prove negligence, and just like that, the case was closed. No arrests, no penalties, no one held accountable. Matvei's life was reduced to a line on a report, forgotten like the stadium that took him. By 2023, the ground where Matvei fell had changed. A new arena stood in its place, modern, sleek, and ready for the future. The SKK Arena, a 23,000-seat hockey stadium built for the 2023 Ice Hockey World Championship. But there is no plaque, no memorial, nothing to mark what once was there or the man who lost his life. All that remains is the haunting footage.